At 6:12 a.m., before the park had fully woken up, something felt wrong. Not loud, not chaotic, just wrong. Inside the gorilla habitat at San Diego Zoo, Safari Park, 12 gorillas stood completely still. They weren't eating. They weren't moving toward the feeding platforms. No playful shoves, no morning calls. Just silence, thick, heavy, unnatural. Lena Brooks, a keeper who had worked this habitat for 7 years, slowed her steps as she approached the glass. Her coffee trembled slightly in her hand. "Why are they all watching?" she whispered. Near the far rock wall in a shaded corner that Nyara always preferred at dawn, lay a dark shape that didn't rise with breath. Lena's stomach dropped. She keyed her radio with shaking fingers. "Control, this is gorilla habitat. I need medical now. Something's wrong with Nyara." There was a pause on the line then. "Copy that. Vet team en route." But Lena already knew. Nyara, the matriarch, the anchor, the one who had held this family together for decades, was not breathing. As Lena stepped closer along the service path, a low sound rolled through the enclosure. It came from Kovu, the silverback. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't dominance. It was long, hollow, and weighted with something Lena had no training word for. Grief. Nyara lay on her side, her black fur catching faint morning light. She looked peaceful, almost as if she had simply chosen to rest longer than usual. But Lena knelt just outside the barrier and felt the truth settle in her chest like a stone. "She's gone," Lena said softly, more to herself than anyone else. When Dr. Evan Morales arrived minutes later, he moved with professional calm. He checked Nyara's pupils, her chest, her pulse. Then he stood slowly and removed his gloves. "She passed sometime before dawn," he said. "Likely cardiac. No signs of distress." Behind the glass, the gorillas had not moved an inch. Nyara was 36 years old, older than most gorillas ever live in captivity. For more than 3 decades, she had been the quiet center of this group. Not the loudest, not the strongest, but the one every other gorilla watched. When Nyara arrived years ago, she had been a traumatized juvenile rescued from illegal trade. She barely ate. She avoided eye contact. Keepers worried she wouldn't survive her first year. But Nyara endured. She grew into something rare, a leader without force. When younger females struggled with newborns, Nyara sat close, showing them how to cradle fragile bodies. When tensions flared between males, she stepped between them, not with aggression, but with presence. Conflicts ended when Nyara arrived. Always. She didn't need to assert herself, an older keeper once said. They trusted her, and now without warning that presence was gone. Kovu shifted first. The massive silverback moved closer, his broad back catching the light, the silver stripes stark against his black fur. He stopped just short of Nyara's body and lowered himself to the ground. He did not touch her. Instead, he sat. One of the juveniles crept forward next, then froze as if unsure whether he was allowed to be this close. A female placed herself beside him, gently blocking him from moving too fast. Inside the observation room, tension grew. "We can't leave the body in there all day," a supervisor said quietly. "There are protocols." Lena didn't look away from the glass. "Look at them," she said. "They know. If we rush in now, we'll break something we can't fix." Dr. Morales exhaled slowly. "She's right. This isn't panic. This is recognition." No one spoke for several seconds. The gorillas began to gather, not in a rush, not in confusion, but deliberately. They formed a loose semicircle around Nyara. No vocalizations, no aggression, just stillness. A young male reached out and touched Nyara's arm. The instant his fingers met cold fur, he pulled back sharply, startled. He stared at his hand as if something impossible had just happened. Another gorilla sat beside him, then another. They did not eat when food was delivered. They did not drink. They did not leave. Hours passed. Kovu released another low sound, deeper this time. It vibrated through the enclosure and into the bones of everyone watching. Lena swallowed hard. "She's been with him since he was young," she murmured. "She taught him how to lead without breaking everything." Nyara had been more than a matriarch. She had been memory, stability, a living archive of this family's history. Without her, the future felt uncertain. As the sun climbed higher, a juvenile began grooming Nyara's shoulder. His movements were slow and methodical, the same motions used to comfort the living. He groomed for nearly 20 minutes, never rushing, never fidgeting. No one stopped him. From behind the glass, a keeper whispered, "This isn't instinct. This is intention." The realization hung heavy in the room. Nyara had held this family together in life, and now in death she was doing it one last time. By late morning, the enclosure felt different, quieter, reverent. The gorillas remained close to one another, bodies angled inward as if protecting something sacred. Lena pressed her hand against the glass. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For all of it." Nyara did not move, but the family she built did. The silence didn't break. As the morning stretched toward midday, the gorilla habitat remained locked in a stillness that felt deliberate, almost guarded. The food platforms were full, fresh fruit greens, the usual enrichment treats, but no one touched them. Water shimmered in the troughs, undisturbed. The air carried the ordinary sounds of the park beyond the enclosure, yet inside time seemed to slow. Lena Brooks stood with her arms folded, eyes fixed on the group. She had seen stress responses before, pacing, chest-beating, sudden bursts of aggression. This was none of that. This was something else. "They're choosing not to move," she said quietly. Dr. Evan Morales nodded. "That's what unsettles people. We expect chaos after loss. This is restraint." Kovu shifted his weight, rising just enough to resettle himself closer to Nyara's body. The silver across his back caught the light, then dimmed again as a cloud passed overhead. He did not touch her. He didn't need to. His presence alone seemed to draw the others inward, tightening the arc of bodies around their matriarch. A juvenile attempted to step away toward the feeding area. He paused after 2 steps, glanced back, then returned to the group. No one blocked him. No one scolded him. Yet the message was clear. Stay. In the observation room, tension grew with every passing minute. "We're pushing the limits here," a supervisor said under his breath. "We have safety standards, decomposition risks, public visibility." Lena didn't turn around. "If we walk in now, we don't just remove a body. We interrupt something we don't understand." Dr. Morales folded his hands behind his back. There's no sign of distress. Heart rate monitors show they're calm. Elevated focus, yes, but not panic. Someone asked the question no one wanted to answer. "What if this never ends?" Lena swallowed. "It will. They just need time to know she's really gone." As if on cue, Kovu released another sound. It was lower than before, almost a hum. It carried through the enclosure, not loud enough to alarm, but steady enough to command attention. Every gorilla turned their head toward him. He held the sound for several seconds, then let it fade. The effect was immediate. The group settled more tightly, bodies angled inward, shoulders lowered. The sound hadn't been a call to action. It had been a signal of acknowledgement. Behind the glass, one of the younger staff whispered, "It's like he's narrating what's happening." Lena closed her eyes for a moment, or translating it. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable once seen. The gorillas began to reposition, not randomly, but with purpose. 2 adults moved to the outer edges of the group, backs turned outward, as if keeping watch. Others shifted closer to Nyara, creating layers of proximity. No one crossed over her body. No one stepped on her space. They were organizing. Dr. Morales leaned closer to the monitors. "This isn't confusion," he said quietly. "This is awareness." Hours earlier, Nyara had been alive. A presence so constant, it was easy to forget she could ever be gone. Now the group behaved as though they were collectively learning a new reality, step by careful step. A keeper who had worked primates for over 20 years shook his head slowly. "I've seen animals react to death," he said. "I've never seen them respond like this." The word no one said out loud hung between them. Grief, not the human version, no tears, no wailing, but something quieter and heavier. Something shared. Midday light poured into the enclosure, illuminating the deep black of the gorilla's fur. Against it, the silver of Kovu's back stood out like a marker, a reminder of leadership passed through experience, rather than force. He remained still, eyes open, scanning the group, occasionally glancing toward Nyara, as if confirming what he already knew. Lena noticed something else. The juveniles were unusually attentive. They weren't fidgeting. They weren't climbing or testing boundaries. They were watching the adults, learning how to behave in a moment no one had prepared them for. This is how culture forms, Dr. Morales murmured. Not taught, observed. A staff member approached Lena quietly. The director wants to know how much longer you think we can justify waiting. Lena finally turned from the glass. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. Tell him this isn't delaying a procedure, it's allowing a process. There was a pause. Then the response came back through the radio. He says we document everything. Sunset is the limit. Lena nodded. That's fair. When she looked back, she caught sight of a small but telling moment. One gorilla reached toward Nyara's hand, then hesitated. He lowered his own hand to the ground, instead mirroring her position. The gesture was brief, almost shy, but it carried weight. They're adapting, Lena whispered. They're finding ways to stay connected without pretending she's alive. That was when the silence changed. It didn't lift, but it deepened, like a room after a final sentence has been spoken. The gorillas weren't waiting anymore. They were settling into acceptance, one quiet choice at a time. No alarm sounded. No protocols were triggered. Just a family sitting with the truth of what had happened. For the first time since morning, Lena allowed herself to breathe. This, she said softly, is their language. And everyone in the room understood exactly what she meant. By early afternoon, the stillness around Nyara began to shift, not in volume, but in purpose. The first sign was movement that didn't feel restless. It felt careful. One of the adolescent males rose from where he had been sitting for hours. He approached Nyara slowly, shoulders low, steps measured. He stopped just short of her body and sat beside her, facing the same direction she was. For a moment, he did nothing at all, as if waiting for permission from a presence that no longer answered. Then he reached out. His fingers moved through the fur along Nyara's arm with the same steady rhythm used during grooming sessions meant to calm the living. There was no urgency in his hands, no confusion. Just repetition, stroke after stroke, precise and unhurried. 20 minutes passed. No one interrupted him. Behind the glass, Lena Brooks felt her throat tighten. He's grooming her, she said quietly, like she can still feel it. Dr. Evan Morales didn't respond right away. He was watching the monitors, the angles of the bodies, the way the others remained still while the grooming continued. Or like he needs to finish something, he said at last. When the adolescent finally pulled his hand back, he didn't leave. He stayed seated, head lowered. Another gorilla took his place beside Nyara, then another. One pressed her forehead gently against Nyara's shoulder and stayed there, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't confusion. It was a sequence. Kovu rose next. The silverback stepped forward, his weight shifting the ground beneath him. He stopped at the edge of the group and lowered himself into a kneeling position. Once, then again. His chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately. He beat his chest twice. Not the thunderous display visitors recognized. This was softer, measured, almost restrained. The sound echoed briefly, then settled into the air like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The effect was immediate. The group stilled even further, as if acknowledging something had been declared. They're closing ranks, someone whispered in the observation room. Lena nodded. They're saying goodbye. Then came the moment no one could have anticipated. A young female moved toward the eastern wall of the enclosure, where a low branch extended into reach. She plucked a broad green leaf, then another, tucking them carefully against her chest. She didn't rush back. She walked eyes down steps, deliberate. She knelt beside Nyara and placed the first leaf across her shoulder, smoothing it gently with the flat of her palm. The second leaf followed, then a third laid across Nyara's hand. The room went silent. Oh my God, Lena breathed. She's covering her. Another gorilla followed, carrying a small branch, then another with loose straw from the bedding area. Each addition was placed with care. Nothing was thrown. Nothing was random. Layer by layer, Nyara's dark form began to disappear beneath green and brown. The contrast was striking, black fur softened by living color, as if the habitat itself were participating. Dr. Morales leaned closer to the glass. This isn't shelter building, he said quietly. The placement is intentional. They're not protecting her from weather. They're honoring her. The gorillas worked together without instruction. Some gathered materials, others positioned them. A few simply sat nearby bodies, angled inward, watching. One older male, once known for challenging Nyara in his younger years, approached and stopped short. He bowed his head slightly, then turned away and sat with his back to the group facing outward. A sentinel. Cameras clicked softly as staff documented every movement. No one spoke above a whisper. It felt wrong to break the quiet. By mid-afternoon, Nyara was nearly fully covered, her torso, legs, shoulders all hidden beneath leaves and branches. Only one hand remained visible, resting against the ground, fingers relaxed. The gorillas stepped back in unison, forming a wider semicircle several feet away. No one touched her again. They sat. They watched. They stayed. The absence of sound was profound. No vocalizations, no pacing. Just the occasional slow breath, the rustle of leaves as a breeze moved through the enclosure. Lena felt tears slide down her face unchecked. "We didn't teach them this," she said softly. "No one taught them this." Dr. Morales shook his head, which means it came from somewhere deeper. Time stretched. The sun shifted westward, casting longer shadows across the habitat. The leaves covering Nyara caught the light glowing softly against the dark earth beneath. A keeper near the back of the room whispered, "This feels like a funeral." No one corrected him, because that's exactly what it was. The gorillas remained in place, present, but no longer touching. The work had been done. Whatever needed to be said without words had been said. Nyara was gone, but she was not alone. The youngest one had been quiet all day, while the adults gathered, moved, and worked with solemn focus. Timo stayed near the back of the group. He was barely 3 years old, still clumsy, still learning the rhythms of the troop. His dark brown-black fur was softer than the others, his movements less sure. He sat close to an older female, watching everything with wide eyes that didn't yet know how to look away. No one told him where to sit. No one pushed him forward or pulled him back. They simply made space. From the observation room, Lena Brooks noticed him for the first time that afternoon. "He hasn't moved much," she said softly. "He's just taking it in." Dr. Evan Morales followed her gaze. That's often how the youngest process things they don't understand yet. Timo watched as the adults finished covering Nyara. He watched the last leaf smoothed into place, the final branch laid gently across her shoulder. He watched as the group stepped back together and settled into silence. Nyara was still. The enclosure held its breath. Minutes passed, then more. The sun dipped lower, warming the western edge of the habitat in gold. Shadows stretched long and slow. That was when Timo stood up. He did it hesitantly, as if unsure whether standing was allowed. He wobbled slightly, then steadied himself. The older female beside him glanced up but didn't stop him. She shifted just enough to clear a path. Timo moved through the adults carefully. They noticed him immediately. Bodies shifted. Space opened. No one blocked him. No one reached out. Kovu watched closely from his place near the front. The silverback didn't move, but his eyes followed every step. Timo walked past the covered form of Nyara without stopping. Instead, he headed toward the edge of the enclosure where wild grasses grew near the fence line, an area the keepers rarely thought much about. There among the green blades, a single yellow flower stood out against the dark earth. Bright, unassuming, alive. Timo paused in front of it. He stared at the flower for a long moment, head tilted slightly to one side. He reached out, pulled his hand back, then tried again. His fingers closed carefully around the thin stem, and with a small tug, the flower came free. He held it up in front of his face, turning it slowly, examining the yellow petals, as if trying to understand what it was and what it could be. Behind the glass, no one breathed. "Is he going to eat it?" someone whispered. Lena shook her head. "No," she said. "Look at how he's holding it." Timo wasn't treating the flower like food. He wasn't squeezing it or tearing at it. He held it gently, almost protectively, the way Nyara had once held him when he was smaller and frightened. Then he turned around. The walk back felt impossibly long. Every adult gorilla watched him. Some leaned forward slightly. Others remained still, eyes fixed on the small figure crossing the enclosure with something bright in his hand. Timo stopped in front of Nyara's covered body. Only one hand was still visible beneath the leaves resting against the ground. Fingers relaxed. Timo looked at the hand. He looked at the flower. He hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like he might change his mind. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, uncertainty written across his face. Then slowly, carefully, he knelt down. He did not place the flower on Nyara's hand. He placed it beside it, right next to her fingers, close enough to be seen. close enough to be shared. The movement was so gentle it barely disturbed the leaves. Timo sat back on his heels and waited. Nothing happened. He leaned forward slightly, peering at Nyara's hand, then at the flower again. His mouth opened just a little, and a soft sound escaped him, high, questioning, fragile. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a call. It was confusion. Behind the glass, Lena pressed both hands over her mouth. Tears streamed down her face unchecked. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "She can't take it." Timo waited a few more seconds, then let out another small sound, quieter than the first. His shoulders slumped. That was when Kovu moved. The silverback rose slowly, deliberately, every motion calm and controlled. He approached Timo and knelt beside him, the size difference, stark, massive strength beside small uncertainty. Kovu placed one large hand on Timo's shoulder. Not heavy, not restraining, just there. Timo froze for a moment, then leaned into the touch as if suddenly aware he wasn't alone. Another adult female stepped closer and reached out with one finger gently touching the yellow flower. She didn't move it. She didn't take it away. She simply acknowledged it. The message was clear. It mattered. Timo looked up at the adults around him. Their faces were calm, present, steady. He stood slowly and stepped back, retreating into the safety of the group. Two adults immediately drew him close, arms wrapping around his small body. He pressed his face into their fur and stayed there still and quiet. No one touched the flower. It remained where Timo had placed it, bright yellow against dark earth and green leaves. In the observation room, the silence broke not with words but with quiet sobs. The director wiped his eyes openly. A security guard stood frozen, his face wet. That someone whispered was a gift. Dr. Morales nodded slowly, and they received it. The gorillas settled again, forming their loose semicircle. They faced Nyara. They faced the leaves. They faced the flower. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, its light washed the enclosure in gold. The yellow petals seemed to glow. Lena leaned closer to the glass, her voice barely audible. He didn't understand death, she said, but he understood love. And in that moment, everyone watching understood something too. What had just happened wasn't instinct. It wasn't imitation. It was intention, small, imperfect, and profoundly human in its tenderness. A yellow flower placed beside a motionless hand, and nothing anyone had ever studied could explain it away. The troupe didn't leave when the work was done. After the leaves had been placed, after the flower had found its place beside Nyara's hand, the gorillas did not scatter the way they usually did at the end of any intense moment. They didn't rush toward food or retreat to familiar corners of the habitat. Instead, they moved only a few steps back and sat facing what they had made. They stayed. The semicircle held wide enough to give space, close enough to remain connected. Back straight, shoulders lowered, eyes steady. It was no longer the sharp stillness of shock, but something quieter, an acceptance that didn't need motion to prove itself. From the observation room, Lena Brooks watched the clock tick forward. 10 minutes, 20, 40. No one touched the food that sat untouched all day. No one broke formation. "They're keeping vigil," she said softly. Dr. Evan Morales nodded. "And they know when it ends." As the sun slid toward the horizon, the light in the enclosure changed. The shadows lengthened, softening the edges of everything they touched. The leaves covering Nyara shifted slightly in the breeze, but the yellow flower remained where Timo had placed it, bright against the dark ground. Timo sat close to the adults, now pressed between two familiar bodies. He no longer stared at Nyara's resting place. Instead, he leaned into the warmth around him, eyes half closed, as if exhaustion had finally caught up to him. One adult rested a hand on his back, slow and reassuring. The group breathed together. Just before sunset, Timo stirred. He slipped free gently, careful not to disturb anyone, and stood. His movements were slower than before, heavier somehow. He walked past the seated adults and climbed the low rock formation near the center of the habitat. It wasn't the highest point, but it was high enough to see beyond the group toward the fading light. He turned his back to the troop and faced the sky. For a moment he stood there, small against the open space, shoulders rising and falling. Then he lifted his chin and released a long, low sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It carried. The sound stretched out across the enclosure, clear and mournful, thinning as it reached the edges of the park. It was not a call for attention or a sign of distress. It was something else entirely, an ending given voice. When the sound faded, no one answered. The other gorillas remained seated. Some lowered their heads. Kovu closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his gaze steady on Timo's back. The vigil was over. That night when the staff finally entered the enclosure, they did so slowly, respectfully. The gorillas had moved to the far side of the habitat, on their own watching, but not interfering. Nyara's body was removed with care, the leaves gathered gently, the flower set aside. Lena stayed until the end. She gave them everything, she said quietly, as the enclosure was restored. And they gave her this. 3 days later, a small tree was planted just beyond the fence line, a young oak chosen for its longevity. A simple plaque rested at its base. Nyara matriarch, guardian, beloved. Visitors paused there longer than usual. Some read the plaque twice. Some said nothing at all. Inside the enclosure, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. The gorillas sat closer during meals. Grooming sessions lasted longer. Conflicts resolved faster, often without intervention. Kovu's leadership remained calm and measured, but others stepped in more readily, filling the space Nyara had left with shared responsibility rather than dominance. Timo was rarely alone now. He stayed near the adults, often curling up beside them during rest periods. When play returned, as it eventually did, it came slowly, cautiously. Short bursts of movement followed by quick glances, as if checking that joy was still allowed. Within 2 weeks, laughter, if it could be called that, returned to the enclosure. Chases resumed. Climbing began again. Life moved forward as it always does, but it didn't move forward unchanged. Dr. Morales reviewed the footage late one evening, alone in his office. He watched the grooming, the leaves, the flower, the hand on Timo's shoulder. He stopped the video, often rewound, studied the small moments that didn't fit neatly into data sets or behavioral charts. What we saw, he said later, speaking to a colleague, wasn't just a reaction to death, it was continuity. They were teaching each other how to live without her. The footage spread quietly, at first shared among researchers, then among caretakers, then beyond. People watched from living rooms and offices, from hospital waiting rooms and quiet kitchens. Many didn't speak after it ended. Some cried, others simply sat still for a moment longer than usual. For Lena, the meaning was simpler. They showed us something, she said, not about animals, about family. Sometimes early in the morning, she would see Timo sitting near the fence closest to the oak tree, his small hand resting against the ground. He never stayed long. He didn't need to. The memory had already been carried forward. Nyara was gone. That truth never changed. But what she had built, the calm, the trust, the way strength could be gentle, remained. And in the end, that was what stayed with everyone who watched. Love doesn't disappear when the one who held it leaves. It moves. And sometimes it teaches the world how to grieve quietly together and without needing words. What stayed with people long after the cameras were turned off wasn't the shock of what happened, it was the quiet weight of it. A gorilla died. That alone was not unusual. Loss is part of life in every ecosystem. But what unfolded afterward at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park unsettled something deeper in everyone who witnessed it, because it forced a simple, uncomfortable question into the open. If animals do not feel grief, then what do we call what we just saw? Nyara lived 36 years without headlines. She never performed for applause. She didn't dominate through force or demand attention. Her power came from consistency, from presence, from the way others calmed when she arrived. In human terms, she was the kind of figure most families only realize they depend on after she's gone, the grandmother who holds generations together without ever announcing herself as the center. When she died, there was no panic, no chaos. There was silence. And in that silence, her family did something no one taught them to do. They stayed. They gathered. They groomed a body that could no longer feel. They covered her gently, leaf by leaf, not to hide her, but to care for her one last time. And then, in the smallest, most fragile act of all, a child still learning how the world works placed a yellow flower beside a hand that would never move again. That moment traveled far beyond the enclosure. People watching from their homes didn't see an animal documentary. They saw something painfully familiar, a goodbye that didn't rely on language, a ritual formed not from instruction, but from love. And that's why the story mattered. Because grief doesn't look the same in every species, but it leaves the same mark. Nyara's death didn't just change her troop, it revealed them. It showed how bonds outlive individuals, how leadership doesn't end when a leader is gone, but is carried forward by those who learn from them. Kovu didn't replace Nyara. He honored her by leading differently, calmer, steadier, more aware of the space others needed. Timo didn't understand death, but he understood loss. And more importantly, he understood offering something beautiful in response to it. That instinct to give rather than withdraw is one many adults struggle to hold on to. What the gorillas carried forward wasn't sorrow alone. It was memory, continuity, a deeper closeness. They groomed more, sat nearer, fought less. They moved forward, but they didn't move on in the way people often rush themselves to do. That distinction matters, because in our world, grief is often treated like a problem to solve rather than a process to respect. We tell ourselves to be strong to move on, to get back to normal. We shorten mourning, we hide it, we rush past it because sitting with it feels uncomfortable. But what if that discomfort is necessary? What if grief is not weakness, but evidence of connection? Nyara's troop showed us something profound. Grief doesn't require words to be real, and healing doesn't require forgetting. It requires time, presence, and permission to feel what has changed. For viewers between the ages of 35 and 60, this story lands differently. At that stage of life, most people have already experienced loss: parents, mentors, friends, partners. Some are facing it now. Others know it's coming. And many carry unspoken grief they never fully allowed themselves to process. This story invites a different approach. It reminds us that leadership is not about control, but about steadiness. That the people who shape us most may do so quietly. That honoring those we lose doesn't always mean grand gestures. It can be as simple as sitting together, remembering, and allowing space for emotion to exist without judgment. It also challenges the idea that humans are separate from the natural world in all meaningful ways. We share more than biology. We share bonds, attachment loss, and the need for connection in moments of transition. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: the smallest gestures often carry the greatest meaning. A hand on a shoulder, a shared silence, a flower placed beside someone who can no longer respond. These are the moments that define who we are, not the loud declarations, but the quiet acts of care that happen when no one expects them. In a time when the world feels increasingly rushed, divided, and noisy, this story asks us to slow down, to notice, to be present with one another, not just in joy, but in sorrow, especially in sorrow. Because love does not disappear when someone is gone. It moves, it teaches, it lives on in the way we treat others afterward. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or see the world a little differently, then this channel is for you. We tell these stories not just to move hearts, but to remind us of what connects us all, across species, across experiences, across time. By subscribing, you support the creation of more meaningful stories, like the stories that don't shout for attention, but earn it through truth, compassion, and humanity. If you believe stories still matter, if you believe kindness is worth preserving, if you believe there's something to learn from the quiet moments the world often overlooks, then subscribe, stay with us, and be part of a community that chooses to listen more closely. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.